when is something considered a success? Well, because here's the thing, like there are comics that might not sell a lot, but they might win awards,
Yeah. But
or
does
or
that
they talk.
matter?
This is when it gets weird.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to All Stars. Now available in audio form. Welcome back to the show, Josh.
Yes, hi, how you doing?
Obviously, you're enjoying the show in the video form. It is here.
Mhm.
But if you are interested in the audio version, it is now available on Apple Podcasts, Amazon. You can stream it through your, Allegra devices or whatever. You got Spotify. It's all
Yeah,
on there. We are
I
not caught up yet because there have been a ton of shows, and I didn't want to just go, here's 87 shows. I was like, no. So we're just piece by piece releasing the old shows, which is actually kind of fun because I'm cleaning up the audio a little bit and popping them out there. So people are getting, and I just took every show that you and I have done,
mhm.
and that's all Stars now. So like all the
Oh,
first
nice.
interviews that we've ever done are part of the All Stars
Well,
lineup.
that's because
So
people can see the evolution of it. I
exactly.
apologize for anyone listening to this without the visual. I talk a lot with my hands,
So do I.
and I sometimes have props. I
It's
sometimes
true.
will be like, "Look at this comic book," or "Look at this toy." I will do a better job of describing it for you if you are watching this. If you're listening to this versus watching this, I have no props today. I don't believe so. I am surrounded by toys, like this dope saber tooth toy based on the Jim Lee design. This is a good.
Nice.
This is a good one. I
Yeah.
keep that on my desk just because it's a very cool toy. But yeah, anyway, so so today we're if you've been keeping up with us the last couple of weeks, we're just doing questions right now. We're doing a lot of Q&As,
Yep.
really trying to answer these things as best I can. Sal and I were just talking about, I think the last time we talked about potentially doing this, we might do is in the future is do one of these where it's just about pitching. And what we'll do is we'll take the nail biter pitch and I'll go through exactly like almost line for line why I wrote it the way I did. There was a time when I was doing pitches to Skybound. One of them was for Ghosted. After I wrote that pitch, Skybound was like, "We're going to use this as a template from now on." They were like, "We're going to send this to people that
What?
are looking for," you know. And everyone
Okay.
has different formats and stuff, but I definitely put a lot of thought into that. So what I would say to this is, if you've been watching the last few videos, we've been doing these questions about writing and breaking in and pitching and the basic process stuff. If you have questions specifically about pitching, let us know because we will do that. I think we'll do it next. I think we can. I just got to get Sal a couple things so we can do it.
Exactly.
But we'll do one of these just about that, and then at some point we'll get back to just talking about movies and comic books. But right now, it was like there's so many questions, and I want to make sure we answer them all. So we're gonna go through these. We're gonna try to dive in today into some of the ones that are left over from the last two. So there are a lot of questions, and so I'm trying to go through as many of these as we can. So the first question here is from Joey Templum 1667. They say, "Do you ever feel burnt out? If so, how do you manage it?" And then P.S. Love your run on Superman, Mr. Williamson. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I love writing Superman, so I'm always glad people enjoy it. Do you ever feel burnt out? Yes. Yes. Last year, I felt like a little bit toward the end of Dark Crisis, going into that year. I was definitely feeling a little bit, and I was doing a lot. I mean, you get to look at like the amount of books I was doing. I think that like I was hitting a point where I was doing more than a book a week. Like books were coming out. There was a moment there where I was writing Duke, Cobra Commander, Dark Ride.
Yeah.
I was doing Green Arrow. I was doing Batman and Robin. I was doing
That's
Superman.
right.
I feel like I'm forgetting shit. Like it was so much, and then I'd worked on the event stuff too, and it was like
Oh,
during
Night
Night Terror
Terrors.
wrote stuff. Yeah, Night Terror was the one that broke me. So it's like I knew this, and so it was getting to a point where I was like, oh, I got to figure something out. And so last year, it was really, I think we talked about it a little bit last time about just being honest with yourself about where you're at and being like, this is what I can manage. And it's so hard because, especially once you hit a certain point in your career, you don't want to say no to anything. You
Yeah.
want to say yes to everything, but at some point you do start to dilute your brain. And you don't have headspace. You don't have headspace. Our physical, like the physical ability to type but it's so much of our jobs is in our head. You have to be able to not be burnt out. And so, yeah, definitely last year I was pretty burnt out, and I had to leave some of the stuff. I mean, that was why it was a tough moment because I didn't really want to leave Batman and Robin or Green Arrow, but I knew those were the two. Batman and Robin was the one I felt was getting hurt the most by me being burnt out. I had to leave some of the stuff I was doing, and that was hard. Like it was like I didn't want to leave. It wasn't really like I wanted to leave those books. Really, I loved them all, but it was like I was definitely there was suffering, and like
Yeah.
Batman and Robin the one that was getting hit the most by it. Green Arrow had was the one that I should have said no to, and I just couldn't because it was like a dream book I'd been wanting to do forever. And it was like, when am I going to get this opportunity again to like do a Green Arrow book? I loved Damian so much, and I felt really it was hard letting go of Damian. You know, it's like, but this is the nature of comics. This is how it is. You're always in a relay run, right? You gotta hand the baton to somebody else, and you hope that when you hand to them, you hand to them in a good position. So, you know, I had to basically recognize at some point, it's like, you know, I don't want to hurt these books, basically. So it's like I had to step off, and so that was really what it was. It was about making some adult decisions, but also there were little things. You know, it was like. We talked about this last time a little bit about health stuff, right? It's like I started going to the gym a lot. I started dedicating time and creating different kinds of boundaries, you know. I don't work on the weekends. Like, I just don't. That's a big one, but it's like it drives some of my colleagues and peers crazy when they can't get hold of me on the weekend and they want to talk through stuff, and I'm like, I'm not available, you know. I shut my brain off like the moment I leave this office on Friday. I don't really do a lot until Monday morning again. You know, so it's like just creating these boundaries for yourself. I think that's, so getting back to the question of burnout, you know, if you do start feeling that level of burnout, usually it can suck. It can suck. And you're just like, but you got to find ways of creating those boundaries to take care of yourself, because, you know, it's in the long run, it's just the better thing for you and your books and your career to take care of yourself. And I think at this point, in kind of the way comics are now, I feel like most people are very understanding of that. Like, nobody wants anybody to burn out, and so if you just go to them and say, "Hey, I need help," you know, it's tough to, because I remember there are times where it was like you get worried of like, if I step away for a moment, I'm gonna lose it, you know, and that gets really challenging. But I think especially if some of that stuff with burnout then does become a question of like you professionally and your relationship with the people you work with. Where if you've been honest before, when it comes time to say I need help, they're there to help you, you know. So you have to, it's kind of like if you've been getting your job done this whole time and then you're like, hey guys, listen, I need help with something, and it's hard. I think naturally people don't want to ask for help, but I think it's a good thing when you're feeling burnt out to be honest about it with the people around you, when you're feeling it. And that's the thing that's tough. You don't even realize how bad it is sometimes until it gets to its worst, when you're really like at the bottom of your burnout. How do you go from a concept to a fully realized story to then script that gets published? As an aspiring writer myself, I would love to know how an experienced writer goes about such things. Much appreciated. It depends. I might have answered this last time, actually, a little bit. It just depends. I mean, you know, I'll have a notebook with an idea in it, so I'll use Nailbiter as the example, where it was like I was doing a lot of research on serial killers. I knew I wanted to do a book about small towns, and I had another idea for a book about serial killers I wanted to do. I had been thinking about this and research on it, and then starting to think about marrying those two ideas together. And then I figured it out. I was on an airplane, and I was like, "Oh, they're born there." Like, that's what I was like. I was starting to figure out, like, "Oh, why are there serial killers in a small town?" I was like, "Oh, they're born there," and then the idea started to flesh out from there. And then it was like a lot of me with my notebooks, just jamming on the characters, jamming on the ideas, working through it, working out, you know, what I wanted, what characters I felt fit certain roles. And some of it you are a mimic at times, you know. I think you are kind of looking at what do you like and kind of mimicking that a little bit.
Sure.
It was funny because when we announced Nailbiter, it was right when True Detective started, and we've been working on it for 2 years.
Oh my God.
But then I watched it, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely there's similarities, but ours was a bit more. We always made sure that Nailbiter was a little more funny, but even then, Nailbiter went through a lot of different incarnations before it became what it is. I kept working on it and writing scenes, writing the characters, kind of getting in their heads, the voices of the characters. Writing a version of issue 1 that ended up not actually being issue 1. You know, it's like you kind of go through this process. But I would say that the recommendation I would have is try to be as thoughtful as you can. Try to put as much thought into it before you put pen to paper. You know, some writers I know will go issue to issue. They don't have an outline. They just kind of start and they kind of have an idea. They have the character in the world and they go.
Yeah.
That is not how I work. I feel like I have to have landmarks. I kind of know what my first year is. I kind of know these big pieces. What I would say to you is think of circles within circles. I think Dan Harmon's talked about this too, where it's kind of like, I know my first issue is a circle within a bigger circle within this circle, you know, and it's like, this story is going to be this. It's like, you know, you have to kind of figure out your circles, basically, right? Like, what are the things, you know? So with Nailbiter, it was like, okay, let's say we get canceled after 5 issues. So I have a mystery. What is the initial mystery? Oh, okay, this guy's missing. Okay, that's my initial mystery. So I can solve that mystery, but I don't have to solve the Uber mystery. So what I would say to you is figure out all these little pieces of your outline. Like work through some of it and recognize, don't be precious and know you can change it. But yeah, yeah.
As an addition to that question,
Yeah,
I was
please go
actually
ahead.
curious. You kind of touched on this interesting thing about like how obviously if you have an idea and you're like cultivating it, and it goes from paper to script to book. There's a lot of in between for that. Are there any ideas you've had that actually do resemble or are one to one the idea you had initially, where you're like, that was just the thing from here to here? It didn't really shift that much because when you're fine tuning and, and refining any concept,
Yeah.
it's like it barely resembles the thing you started with.
Wow, that's a good question. Not barely. No, no. Everything definitely has changed. I mean, Ghosted went through changes, but I think the core was still there. It's like it's Ocean's 11 in a haunted house. Like that was the core of the first five. But when it was like, oh, we're going to continue it and we're going to do more stories with this cast, then I had to like rethink a lot of it.
Sure.
Everything, characters, everything, and like, how does this continue beyond this initial story? Um, Nailbiter, the biggest change was that Warren was free, so that made a lot of changes to it. But the initial idea of like, oh, the 16 serial killers are from the same small town, what caused it? That never changed.
Yeah.
Birthright went through a couple little changes. Birthright got bigger and changed in some places. I mean, originally when I was thinking about Birthright, it was called something else. And it was only a 3-issue story.
Really?
It was kind of just what was the first issue. Because remember we talked about it last time where I was like Twilight Zone episodes. It was really just almost what the first and second issue was kind of it was what I had. And then it got a lot bigger after I started really working on it and pitching it and being like, oh, this could be this huge epic thing. No one's going to make it. But I can, there was that joke for a long time of like, don't pitch your 50-issue fantasy epic. But that's what I did.
That's exactly
I made this joke before. Do you write chronologically or do you write the ideas into where they fit into the main overarching story? Also, do you plan out the entire story or arc without a specific ending in mind? I always know the ending. Like I feel like I have to know the end. I have to know where I'm driving. And don't get me wrong, there's things that can pivot and change. I just have a general idea of the ending of kind of everything I'm working on. Like I know the last scene sort of stuff. And that does change a little bit. It's funny when I was on Flash, this is gonna sound really silly. I had a rule on Flash. I would never end an issue with Barry running at the reader.
That's funny considering Speed Metal.
That's the thing. So Speed Metal. So here's the thing. It's weird, right? Because my last issue of Flash has him running. That was it. But here's the twist. So my last issue of Flash has Barry running at the reader, right? Speed Metal, which is technically I feel is my real last issue, has Wally running at the reader. So I feel like it was a bit of a change in the story. So I try to write everything as chronological as possible, but that's why the outlining thing comes in. So it's like when I was on Flash, this was a frustrating thing with Flash, was having to write was double ship. And so you had to know what you were doing. You had to know where you were going. And so with Howard Porter I would want him to do like 5 issues in a row or 6 issues in a row, right? That would be a year of Howard's life. So I would always write the Howard arc. I think I talked before. I would always write Howard's arc before I would write almost the whole year before him.
Wow.
So I'd be like, I'm driving to Flash Forward. I'm writing 47. I actually think this was the time where it was written in order a little bit because I was ahead. But I wrote Flash Year 1 so far in advance of like the issues leading into it. And you know what I mean? So you're writing these things kind of out of order in a weird way. But that meant I had to know it. And it sucks when that happens because it makes pivoting a lot harder. You kind of get locked into some stuff. You can't pivot.
Yeah.
So I try to know as much as I can. Now, let's say on Superman, when I started working on Superman, I wrote down all of the villains. And I'm like, what villains do I want to use? And then I started thinking of like ideas for those villains, a story arc for those villains, and way to connect to those villains. But I didn't have them necessarily in an order. Like I kind of knew it. It was like, okay, well, this villain will be this arc, this arc. But then, things change because of events, different pieces come in. I have a couple of, and then there was 2 story ideas that I had for next year that are now becoming one. Like they got merged at one point, and it actually ended up becoming like a very serendipitous, like, oh shit, this is really cool. I'm glad we did this kind of thing. But yeah, I try to plan as far out as I can.
Right on.
Yeah, this got weird. I wonder why I did this.
Hmm.
Okay. Oh, hey Josh, love you. Nice. Was it always the plan to bring Luthor back to being the primary bad guy for Superman, or just happened to line up perfectly with the new movie coming up on the horizon? Keep up the good work. The movie stuff never impacted me. I never got hit with the movie stuff. There was never any like go back to status quo stuff. And in fact, when you see what's happening in Superman this summer, like you're not gonna think it has nothing to do with the movie at all. No, with Lex, it was the story with Lex is not over because 25 hasn't come out for one, and then the Lex stuff is not over yet. So I think people read 24 and 25 and you see where we're going with it. It's not going to be a status quo as you think it is.
Mm.
You know, let's see here. How do you pitch to a publisher? Is there a proper way to pitch, or does everyone have their own way to do so? What are some mistakes to avoiding while trying to pitch? Well, I think clarity is something you should really do. Everyone has their own format, and we're going to talk about this next time. I have my format. I have my particular thing I try to stick to. It's weird, you know. So sometimes you pitch things very formal, right? So there is no set formula. There is no specific thing everyone has done the same. I've had jobs get in different ways, you know. It's like when I was on Flash, that was a pitch that I did in person. You know, I pitched it in person. I had to write a version of it and turn it in, but I wrote it in person. Or I did it in person. I turned it in. Nailbiter was like that, where it was like I made a written up pitch. Mike Henderson drew 6 pages. I lettered them, so it was this black and white, like lettered version that I did myself. Mike and I did it. We didn't have anything else. We didn't have covers, anything, and we turned in this black and white 6-page version of it, and that is what Image saw and was like, "Let's do it." Right?
Interesting. Okay.
Birthright was one where Birthright was actually greenlit long before Nailbiter was, but they came out. It was weird. It was like Birthright was greenlit 6 months before Nailbiter was, but then Birthright came out 6 months after Nailbiter did. Uh, that one is different. I was walking WonderCon in 2013. I was walking around WonderCon with Sean Makowitz, who was the editor on Ghosted, who's now a publisher at Skybound. He and I knew each other. We were friendly. Now, like, I consider that guy like my best friends. I love that dude. But it was like at the time we were just kind of getting to each other. We talked on the phone a lot. You know, we had met in person a couple of times. But we were walking the floor, just talking about books, talking about ideas. And I was like, oh, I have this idea. I got this thing. It's impossible to pitch, though. It's like hard to explain. And it's like we're at the Midtown booth, not Midtown. We're at the Mile High booth, so we're like looking through back issues and talking. You know, like literally, you know the routine, like
Oh, I
going
do.
through
Yes.
And then I said, I was like, oh, I have this idea for this thing. It's this fantasy thing, and I was like, this is what it is. I basically told him like, here's what it is. This is why I always talk about like your pitch has to feel like you can talk to your friend, your buddy at a bar, because this is where I learned that lesson, was because I literally was like, instead of being like, here's my elaborate pitch that's been rehearsed a million times, I was like, here's what it is, you know. And then and then literally I remember like a week later I was taking a nap in on my couch, and I got this call, and he was like, Sean was like, I talked to Robert and another guy named Da, who's I think he's president of Skybound. I'm sorry, Da, if you ever watched this, I don't remember your title. High up authority person. And they were like, they want to do it, and this is what they're offering. And I was like, oh my God. Like it's so everything has kind of a different way of going about it. But what I would say to you is clarity. Like I said this before, clarity. Like know what your story is, know what you were pitching, right? And then obviously don't be insulting. Right. You know, don't go in there and be insulting to them and be like, your books suck, you need my book. Because I mean, I've heard that in person before. I have seen people literally in person be like, man, you guys are doing a lot of bad books, you should do my book. It's like, dude, I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing? There's people
Has that ever gone anywhere? Like, I mean, I can't imagine it ever like succeeding, but have those people who make those kinds of assertions, do they inevitably end up someplace, or has any of them ever
not the
gone?
ones that I have seen personally.
Right.
So
It never
I'm
really
sure
bears fruit. Like it's not a sneak attack. It's not going to work.
I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure there's somebody out there that was incredibly rude and then they still got a job. I'm sure it's happened, but not the people that I've seen.
Yeah.
All right. What was the most difficult part about learning to write for monthly comics? Man.
Yeah.
It's weird because at some point it becomes muscle memory, but also you don't want to always fall into. You don't want to fall into your own trap muscle memory. I think the hardest part for me to learn when as I was coming up, I mean, you gotta just do it. Like you gotta just do it. You gotta be actively able to just do it. I mean, I've always been like a fountain of ideas. Like I've always been like a nut about things, you know. But I
Yeah.
think the part of like you gotta sit down and do it. Oh, typing! I hate typing. Typing is my least favorite part of the job. Uh, you know, I think that the hardest part though is you know what? No, I know what the hardest part is. Actually, no, I'm gonna rewind. I know
All
exactly what the
right.
hardest part.
What is it?
Finding yourself. All right. So, what is your thing? You know, when I was in Brian Michael Bendis' class, he would always talk about your voice, but really, it's that. What is your thing? What is your gimmick? What is your style? Right. I think that can be tough. Rom V's talked about this recently. You know, I think a lot of people, this is something they kind of forget about. Like, you love comics so much, right? And we all love comics, and you kind of know what comics you like, and you're like, well, I want to write comics like that, and that's great. Like I've definitely done that. You know, we talked this last time. Like clearly, I'm a fan of Mark Waid and Jeff Johns. Like that's not a secret. You know, but you can't mimic them. You got to do your own thing, and I think that's the hardest part is to find your way in this stuff. Like, what is your version? Not only your version of the story, but yeah, where are you in it? Like that's the stuff that's always like, what are you? You know, not what are you saying about you, but just like what is your version of these things? Because I think it's really easy to fall into like this is what I think this book should be based on these past things. You know,
Yeah.
it's really about finding your own take on it, and I think that's where people end up really excelling. I have this, dude. I'm gonna go to a whole random thing right now. We're gonna talk about this. Have I ever told you my Apple theory? You ever talked about this before?
It doesn't sound familiar. I'm looking forward to
All
hearing
right,
it.
we're gonna talk about my Apple theory. Okay,
All right.
all right. So if you got 10 artists in a room, 10 comic book artists in a room, and you said, you put an apple in the middle of the room and you said, I want you to draw an apple,
Hmm.
right? Just draw an apple. That's all I
Now, did
want
you
you to do.
say now? When you say that, do you mean draw that apple?
Ah, interesting. Yes. Okay. So draw an apple, right? That's all I want you to do is draw an apple, right? Now, here's the thing. Let's say Scotty Young is in that room,
Yeah.
right? It's going to be some crazy apple, have like a worm come out of it with a smile or whatever. You never know, right? Like telling you fuck off. Who knows, right?
Right.
Uh, Frank Cho might be in that room, and he might draw an apple that has a butt. You know, we don't know. Like, I mean, you know, it's like, and I mean that with love.
Of course.
Like,
Yeah.
it'll be. You might have Alex Ross in that room. You might be like, "Holy shit, that is the greatest drawing of an apple I've ever seen. It looks like an apple, right?"
Hmm.
And you might get Frank Miller in that room, and he might be like, "It does not look anything like an apple, but it is an apple. I know it's an apple. I know it's an
Right.
apple, right? It is an apple." But you're just like, "Holy shit! Like that's a crazy interpretation of an apple." This is true of all these comic artists. Like they come through, you know, Jim Lee might come through and do an apple, you know, and it's weird. You might have people who literally are like that come through there and they draw an apple. It is a drawing of an apple, right? And that's great. That's awesome. You might walk in and be like, that dude, that is talent. You might get something else over here where it's like, it is the craziest thing you've ever seen. You understand it's an apple, but you're like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Right? I think the same thing applies to writing. And I think this is where sometimes people run into problems with comics because writing is different. Because Alex Ross is a whole other beast, right?
Oh yeah.
But there are some writers in comics who are basically writing the apple is exactly how it's supposed to look, right? And that's great. It's awesome. And there's definitely a place for that. But what ends up happening is you have a lot of people doing that. And at some point you're like, well, that's just an apple. Like you know what I mean? You kind of go, okay, I get it. The job is done. I understand. There's the apple.
Yeah.
But the ones that really attract you, the ones that really get you, are the ones that are those. Like there's their takes on it, right? The ones that stick in your mind. This is why it's so fascinating when movies do really well. Or people like movies that win Oscars that you never remember afterwards,
Yes. Uh huh.
right? You're just like, wait, what one Best Picture? That one Best Picture. I never even heard of that movie before. Like that, but then you remember those ones that really stick with you, and sometimes they don't look like this cookie cutter thing, right? You know, it's funny. Like when you're in writing school, they teach you to write essays, and every essay is the same, right? It's like opening statement, 3 points, concluding statement,
Yeah.
right? And there's a version of that for writing comics as well, right? But it's the people that, and I think it's good to learn that, but it's those people that break away from that
Well,
where you start to get interesting.
that's so important is knowing the fundamentals so that you can break them. Like it's one thing to look at, and I don't want to get too in the weeds, but like
Yeah, of course.
Frank
Yeah.
Miller now, right?
Mhm.
You can tell he knows what he's drawing looks like.
Mhm.
but it's only when you understand that he understands that do you kind of like see like the craft in it.
But here is the craft in it, but also here's the thing of this is that like if I showed you these drawings of apples, you would be able to know exactly which one was Frank Miller's.
Right.
And the power of that, like that's real. That's power. And I think
Yeah.
that's the thing where you might get a bunch of where it's like, oh, it looks like an apple, but I can't tell who drew it. You know?
Uh-huh.
And it's like, but then you get to the ones like we were talking about. And that's the thing with artists. But I do think because it's a visual medium, it's really easy to talk about this with artists. But I do think there's something to that with writers. And this is why I sometimes think some writers end up struggling ultimately, is because they're doing the apple. They're doing the apple that looks exactly like the apple. And it can be tough. I mean, because again, Alex Ross, that would probably look like a photo of an apple, but it wouldn't at the same time. That's where Alex Ross is always fascinating. It's fascinating where Alex Ross, he'll paint an apple and it looks like an apple, but it has something to it. There's something different about it that gives it
Uh-huh.
flair that still looks like a painting. You can still feel it, the brush strokes, whatever you can. And I think that's what separates stuff out. And so I think that's the hardest thing to learn, to be
Yeah.
honest, because it's such a thing you can't actually I don't want to say you can't learn, but you can't replicate it very easily. You have to,
Right.
and ultimately that comes down to this is why sometimes when I talk about this stuff of like, I'm very happy to give people advice, but at the same time, I'm like, don't just do what I did. You got to find your version of it. You got to
Yeah,
find
yeah,
your
yeah.
way. Yeah, I think that's the hardest part. All right, so okay, why do you think, despite the extreme popularity of adaptations, comics themselves haven't seen a significant increase in sales? And do you think that a name-only adaptations like Civil War, Age of Ultron have any way played a part in this issue? I'm not sure
Hmm.
about that second part of it,
Yeah.
about that piece of it. Sales in comics are really weird because, and you and I talked about this, the sales that are online are not real. They're not real. Um,
You mean like the ICP2 stuff or like the old Comicron
Yeah,
website and
in
stuff
this
like
stuff,
that?
it's never. It's. I mean, this things I've always noticed is that there are indicators of things. I think, and I think there's a good way of monitoring the patterns and stuff like that. But outside of the publishers, no one knows the real numbers.
Yeah.
Even when you look at those things, where it's like you have to make an assumption that a book never sells past the first month, which we know is true. And then don't get me wrong, when things are a hit, you know it's a hit, right? But there are books that kind of level out and they stay where they're at, and they may not look like hits, but they stay where they're at. Well, let me pull this question up again. So sales are weird because if you actually start looking at sales over the last like 20 years, what you're really talking about, like they fluctuate. They go like this. It isn't this the whole time. Especially, I mean, post the 90s, the 90s was a whole other beast. And when you talk about sales versus numbers, because when you're talking about pre-direct market, what they were doing then was like, yes, they would mail out like 1,000 copies of those books. That didn't mean they sold a million copies. They would tear the covers off. You know what I mean? They were doing tearaways. They were, it was a whole different. It was a different system until the direct market came into play.
Yeah.
Once direct market comes into play, you kind of understand the real numbers a little bit. But even then, you have different things. And now it's weird because you have digital, you have collections. You do have things that are returnable. You do have things that go to Target. Like there, there is a weird math to it at this point. So when you're talking about sales, it's kind of like,
Well,
but it is tough. I mean, when you're talking about video games, I mean, I understand what they're saying because you're just like, why is it that millions of people go to see an Avengers movie, but a million people don't read comics?
right.
We could probably do a whole video just on this. This is a tough thing because there are times I'm sure you've heard this too. You might say to somebody like, I read comics, I work on comics, and their beautiful answer back to you is they still make comic books. Like
Yeah.
that is a real thing and that is rough. And so I think there is a public awareness thing where it's just like there's so much stuff now. I mean, when we were kids, it was like I mean, it's crazy to think about now when we were kids and you're just like, I walk to Blockbuster or Hollywood Video, wherever you're going, and I'm buying my one VHS tape.
Yep.
On cable, there was limited bad channels, and you basically whatever you turned on to HBO in that moment, that was the movie you were watching. You might
Uh-huh.
the amount of movies I discovered in the middle.
Right.
It's like it's funny to think about Beetlejuice. For years with Beetlejuice, I had never seen Beetlejuice completed for a long time. I remember when we finally had the Beetlejuice. We finally had the Beetlejuice on VHS, and we're putting it in and being like, I had never seen the beginning before. Now, I
Yeah, you
seen the
didn't even
part
see
where the
them
baby
die.
died. I see them die. But remember, there's another beginning where it's him for like it's him in the shadows or whatever at the very very beginning, right? It's like I was like, oh shit, I didn't know. I remember the first time I saw that scene, I was like, am I watching a Beetlejuice
The
sequel?
director's cut or something? Yeah.
No, yeah, I
Oh,
was
a
like,
sequel.
I was a little kid, so you're just like, oh my god. I remember the first time I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark. I saw Temple of Doom before I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Wow.
You know, I saw them in a different order. So it's like the amount of stuff like that. So it's tough right now because it really, I think what it comes down to is competition, people's time, people availability. You know, it's like comics is one of the few things, man, this is tough. Almost everything in life that you want can be delivered to your house.
I know. Yeah.
And comics are like that too. There are comics like that. But comics is one of the few things left where it is the mecca of it, right? The like you must go to a location of it to get something. It's one of the last people standing, right? Because you're talking about like Blockbuster doesn't even not Blockbuster. Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore.
No.
But the fact that like Best Buy is like we're not doing physical media anymore. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
that stuff is. I was talking about this week. We were talking about a movie, and I was like, "Oh, I own that on Blu-ray," and they were like, "What?"
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah,
I'm
like what? Why? And it's like
if I really
because
love something, I will buy a physical version
same.
of it.
Oh no,
For,
I'm
for
so
free movie.
thrilled. There have been like amazing deals lately on Amazon for 4K movies now, and
Oh
I've
yeah,
just been
dude.
like,
Yep.
like I bought Coming to America on 4K the other day. I was like, wow,
Did
it's
you
just
really?
it's $13. So
See,
bam.
that's funny. The things I'll get is if it's something that's clearly like the 4K of it, so it's like a James Cameron movie. You're like, okay,
Oh yeah, no, I have the Abyss
I,
and
yeah,
True
me too.
Lies and stuff, but
Um, uh, yeah. So this is a tough question because you're just like, why aren't these millions of people going to comics?
yeah, if
Some
you
of
can
it is
find
a
that
tough.
out, you should tell the publishers because
Yeah,
they want to know that
if I had
too.
the answer, poof, say,
Oh yeah,
it's always funny with that where it's like if the answer is so easy, why don't we do that? You know, it's always that kind of thing.
yeah.
It's a tough question. I think it's really hard.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm gonna read this one. I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit more. Well, this one was
Yeah,
about research. Was how much research goes into writing for pre? I think I answered this one last week a lot.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I didn't. Maybe I didn't answer this one.
Was this research into
Yeah, it
physics
was
and
how
stuff?
much research goes into writing for pre-existing characters like Flash or Superman? How do you decide where to pull
Oh
from, what to leave out? Do you
no,
write
you
your
didn't do that one
ide-
yet.
yeah? Do you write your idealized versions of their personalities or try to build on what came before? It depends. I do a lot of research on the books I'm working on. I do a lot of reading. I'll buckle in and be like, I'm gonna read it all, or I'm gonna read the. I have this thing I tell those people that are coming into DC, particularly, you cannot read the greatest hits. You have to read the continuity. Like you can't just come in and be like, I read this one, this greatest hits book, or I read this one book that everyone told me to read. It's like that's great. You read one of the best, but you got to read everything else. Like you got to find your way in there and read other stuff.
Yeah.
To read a lot of that stuff. Okay, so when it comes to the characters' voices or how they act, it's tough because for the most part, people want evolution, they want arcs, but they also don't. And so it's hard to have these characters grow. And when you get to this happens all the time where it's like somebody will be on a book, they'll have those characters really grow, and other creative team will come on and act like none of it happened. you know? And it's tough because it's a double-edged sword because there are readers who are like, I read this character every month regardless. I love this
Right.
character, whoever. But then you have people who follow creators. You have people who are like, I'll try this issue one, and you don't want to scare them off.
Yeah.
It's like with Superman, obviously Superman's gone through a lot of stuff over the years, but a lot of people are like, my idealized version is Christopher Reeve or the cartoon. And Superman's a little different because I think there's a bit more of a universal feeling of who Superman is. I think. But you and I talk about it all the time with like Peter Parker because Peter Parker goes all over the place with stuff.
I
So
think actually it's more that people have a universal understand. I think more people think that they know the definitive version of Peter than they
Mhm.
do Superman. I think that Superman's one of those things where it's like the template they have is Christopher Reeve Superman movie, is the
Yeah.
cartoon show. Like it's not
Yeah.
like Dan Jurgens Superman. It's
Mhm.
some external force. Whereas when they make another version of Spider-Man, people are drawing from a run that they love.
The Flash is the same way.
Yeah.
It was the same thing I was doing with Flash at times, where it was like I had people who it's really weird with Mark and Jeff because Mark and Jeff, if you read their runs back to back, which obviously there's holes, like there's other people who came in. You had Brian Augustine, and Grant and Mark Bard their stuff. There's stuff in there in the
Yeah.
mix, but I always feel like you could ultimately read Return of Barry Allen all the way to Flash 225, and that's like a complete story, I feel, right? So that creates an identity for Wally. And it's like, but that's why Barry was kind of fascinating to me, because Barry was a little bit more of a blank slate, because he historically didn't have much of a personality, even though he kind of did. If you read everything with him, it's like he kind of did have a personality. His personality was that he was a little bit of a nerdy dork guy who was awkward and had moments of jerkdom. Because let me tell you, buddy, there's stuff. If you go back to those stories, Barry was a weirdo. So I had to you go those things, but I think you what you need to do is in those cases, just think about the character and think about the story, because ultimately you're the one that has to write it. Yeah. So it's like, what are you gonna want? What version of him do you want to write? I think that's the place to start sometimes. But you do definitely need to look at those pieces, because there might be situations where it's like you don't want to write somebody so out of character. It's tough, because what'll happen is sometimes somebody will come in at the end of a story and be like, "Oh, this is so out of character," and it's like, well, yeah, they went through a whole emotional arc. If you have an idea for a comic but not know how to write a script or how to pitch it, where would be a good place to start? This is tough, because ideas are a dime a dozen, right? And you can have ideas. I have ideas every day. I have random ideas all the time, and I write them down. I put them in a notebook, whatever. I would say for you, kind of do what you're doing right now. Listen to me talk about this. And we always work. Get the books. Get your hands on some scripts if you can, right?
Yeah.
Look at the scripts and start small. Can you write a 5-pager? Can you write an 8-pager? Because that's my thing. If you can't write an 8-pager, you can't write 10 issues.
That's true.
Like, it's reasons why Marvel and DC kind of start people off with like 8 and 10 pages. My first job for Marvel was a 10-pager. My first job for DC was a 6-page comic. So it's like, you gotta, if you can prove you can do those things. So that would be the place to start is small. Like, go get your hands on some stuff. Some scripts, look at some books. We've talked about it before about Twilight Zone episodes. Really think about that, of like, Twilight Zone episodes are really simple. It's like a joke, beginning, middle, and end. Just start really as small as you can.
Where can people go to find a script? Besides, I mean, I've told people a million times, like, go check out Bendis's Words for Pictures. Go check out the Alan Moore comic / book that he put out. That like is just I would not use Alan Moore's template, which is just block letters on a typewriter.
Brian has published a lot of stuff, because there was the Power script book, there was the Ultimate Spider-Man script book. I'm looking behind me right now.
Yeah.
What else do I have behind me? I have How Comics Works. That was the Dave Gibbons one.
Mm-hmm.
But your Words for Pictures is out there. DC's published a couple. I would just try to get your hands on those books that are available. Go to the library if you can. But it's like, and I think that in my newsletter, I posted a few. Like, I think I posted the script for Robin #1, right? So things like that are out there you can find. But then again, start small. Be like, can you tell us a story? It's funny, because when it's weird is that some people tell me a pitch they have and like, well, it's an 8-page. And I'm like, that's not 8 pages, bro. That's like 20 or 30. And then there are times people are like, I have this idea for a comic, and they tell me, and I'm like, and that is an 8-page story. Like, you can, what I mean? It's a mix, but I would really start small. Start as much as you can. Just get in there. I mean, and also right now, because the internet, you can do an 8-pager and then put it online and show people you can do it. I think that's a good place to start. But yeah, I would not worry. This is gonna sound crazy. Don't worry about pitching yet. Just learn how to write an 8-page comic. Just an 8-page story. Because the pitching thing is dumb. It doesn't even matter. Because let me tell you what sucks. If somebody's like, I love that idea, write it, and you're like, I do not know how to write. Like, oof, you better. Yeah, that's a rough one. And don't be wrong. Like, we talked about this before, where it's like, if someone asks if you're a god, you say yes. So you
got to do it, but also
you got to do it. But let's see here. Okay, I'm gonna read this one, and then we'll switch over to the other one after this. Or actually, we should do the Patreon questions after I do this one.
Oh yeah, all right.
He goes, hey Josh, I've been wondering for a long time now, how exactly do you get put onto a big 2 book? Do you pitch an idea you have for a story, or do they tap you to take the helm? Love your work, man. Your Superman run and back issues helped get me back into comics after a very long hiatus. Awesome. Welcome back to comics. That's really great. Thank you. I'm very happy you're here. Come hang out with us and make comics, talk about comics. So again, as everything I keep saying here, it depends. So Flash, I went to them and I said, "This is what I'm thinking about." When I did the book called Illuminati with Marvel, I was like, I want to write a book about villains. So that was kind of how it started. With Flash, I've been pretty lucky in my career that rarely anyone has come to me and been like, "Here's a story idea that I have." That's been pretty rare. Like very, very rare. So it's like with Flash, I was like, "Here's my pitch," and they were like, "Great, let's do it." And then we walked through it. There's obviously notes, and there were things I didn't know. Because remember, when I pitched Flash, I had no idea what Rebirth was. Rebirth, I
Really?
had no. When I pitched it initially, no, I didn't know. I didn't know New 52 was ending. I knew nothing. I was
Oh
outside.
yeah.
I was outside.
Right.
I had a couple friends who worked on books, but not really. I didn't really know them that well, or I didn't talk to them. Like Scott and I would talk occasionally. Like I knew people, but I wasn't in the room in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And so, when I went to Dan and I said, "This is my plan this is what I would love to do with Flash. This is my pitch." I remember Dan was like, "Give me 2 weeks, I'll get back to you." And part of that because they were working, like him and Jeff had been developing Rebirth in that moment, so they knew. I didn't know. I remember even when I came into the offices and they were like, "We're gonna relaunch." They told me they were really gonna relaunch everything. It was funny because they didn't want to tell me everything, but they were like, "We're gonna relaunch everything. You're gonna do Flash. It's gonna be double ship." So that was the information I was given, starring Barry Allen. And then they were like, "Kid Flash will get his powers, so he will be in it." And then we talked about Godspeed. We talked about villains. I pitched a couple things that didn't work for different reasons. There were things in my mind. I was still in New 52 mode, so I was like, "Let's reintroduce Max Mercury and do it this way." And they were like, "No," because they knew
There was
what
no
was going.
point.
There's no point. And then I got a call like maybe 2 weeks later, and they were like, "Okay, here's the deal. Wally West is coming back. This is what's happening." And I was like, "What?" Like that's so it was like, and that definitely changed things. It was like, okay, and I had written issue 1, I think, and I had to rewrite some stuff. I remember even then it was like we had already mapped out the first 8 issues. There's a reason why the first time Wally's really in the book, outside of a few mentions, is issue 9. Because I had already outlined out the first 8 issues before I found out that Wally was coming back, and so then I had to like go back through and like redo a few things. But then we knew he was going to be Titans. It was all this stuff. It was a really interesting moment. But for the most part, I've gone to them. So I'm like, I want to do this book. There are instances where they've come to me and they said, "Do this," and what I've found, or here's the story, here are the prompts, here's the thing. What I've found is those don't always work for me personally, because that means I didn't have as much passion for it or wasn't obsessed with it as I was. And so I've definitely had some things that didn't work, and it was because of that. There are books I've done at DC that were like maybe top down in a way.
Top down. What do you mean by that?
So top down is when the editors or somebody up high is like, "Hey, I want you to do this, like this book or this thing," or you take a bullet every once in a while, like somebody's got to do this, and they're like, "I guess I'm doing it." It's like that has happened. But for the most part, when you look at books like Green Arrow, I had an idea for that, but when they came to me and they're like, "Do you want to do it?" And I was like, because at the time I was like, I built all this stuff up where it was like, we brought Roy back, we brought Connor back, we had these things moving, and Dark Crisis, we knew Oliver was going to disappear. I was doing all this with the intent of like, well, then somebody else is going to do it.
Sure.
And they were like, "Do you want to do it?" And then they were like, if you don't do it, there is no Green Arrow book if you don't do it."
Wow.
So we know no Green Arrow book in Dawn of DC if you don't do it. And I was like, it was a weird mix of like I made this bed basically. So
Yep.
it's like Superman was weird because at the time I was working on Dark Crisis. Dark Crisis wasn't over yet. I don't know how to even start it. Issue 1 didn't even come out yet.
Oh my god.
And I was originally planning on doing a different book at the end of Dark Crisis. There was a different plan in place, which we changed around a lot of stuff as we were at that. Not a lot of stuff, but it was like, things change. Sure. And then they were like, "Oh, yeah," they called me and they're like, "Do you want to do Superman?" And I was shocked by this. I did not anticipate it at all. I never thought they would offer me Superman. But I had ideas, I had thoughts. And so I went and met with them and was like, "Well, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I would like to do. Does that line up with what you guys want to do?" And it did. So it was like, okay, all right, we're on the same page. And so that was how that came together. So it depends. Batman was a situation that was kind of weird because we knew Chip was going to come on, and I was going to do the crossover stuff with Shadow War with Robin. So it was like, okay, so I'm going to write this bit. So it was sort of like, do you want to do this? Yes, I can do this. I kind of hesitated a little bit, but then I was like, sure, you know, you only get so many chances at these things. And
Yeah.
so that was when that was what I was like, okay. So, I mean, all my creator owned books have been me. You know, even G.I. Joe, it was like Skybound had this big picture they had already wanted to do, they already knew, but it just aligned with what I wanted to do as well.
Uh-huh.
So I have been lucky with this. I had this conversation with a creator. I've had this discussion with a few creators. There was a creator I knew for a while who was like, we were asking to a Comic-Con. I'm not going to name their names, but we were at this convention and they were just like, they were frustrated about their place in the industry and just their career in general. And they were kind of like, telling me, they're like, well, nobody, they really believe that it had been their experience that the editors have an idea, go to them, and they execute that idea. They thought that was the only way you did it. They thought there was nothing else. And I was like, sitting there explaining it, and I'm like, dude, no. Like, I have a passion for this book or this character. I go to them and I go, I love this character. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? And then they go, yes or no. And they're aligned to their dream. And that's the thing. That they say no, it's okay. I'm a big boy. I'm
Sure, I'll have another idea. Like I got another pitch.
And you know, like even today I was pitching something today, and it's like you just kind of go and you go, here's what I'm thinking, and but also knowing when it's not working out, and that's where desperation comes in. Sometimes it gets difficult when you're feeling desperate, and you want that job so badly that you're just like, they said no to my idea, but they have an idea. I don't like it, but I just want the job. Like, and that is, dangerous. I do not fault anybody for that. It is your decision. And if that's what you're feeling and you think you can make the best of it, I know some people are like, oh, say no. Just say no. I'm torn on that because I do think that can lead to other opportunities. And especially when you're starting out in your career and having to kind of tough it out a little bit, you know, take some hits here and there. I do think it's better for you in the long run. You know, it's tough, but I do think that is the way to go a lot of times with these things.
Colton45 asks, when doing an event, how do you go about using a character that another writer is using without trying to spoil or step on their toes?
That is one of the hardest parts of the job. It is, I think, one of the hardest parts of working in superhero books is when you work on these characters, you kind of want to take ownership of them. You want to kind of hold them tight, right? And that isn't the case. You don't own that character. The company owns that character. Ultimately, they have the decision. And that's what's kind of funny about working with other people is that like they also don't own that character, regardless of what they think, you know? And ultimately, it is the company's decision what happens to those characters. You know, like ultimately, it just is. You know, you have a push. You can depending on where you're at and the level of trust you built with that publisher, you can have a say. But even then, there are times where it's not their decision either. You know, there are movies that these things are very big, elaborate companies with a lot of moving parts. You know, it can be one of the hardest parts. Like Damien is a good example of that, where it's like when I was working on Damien, when I got the job to work on Damien for Robin, I literally put him on an island. Like
no one can use him, no one can touch him. He can't leave.
Yeah, he was on an island. And then I remember there was a book, and what happens is that it can kind of, and this is something I try to talk to publishers about now, and I'm talking to DC about particularly, is that like when you do that, there's always the risk of making a book not count. And that's where you have to be careful, because it's like if you basically create this side book and the readership is like, well, the main book is where things are happening, I don't know what's over there. And if that book is so far away in terms of what's going on, it can devalue that book. And what sucks is sometimes, because, you know, just the nature of the industry, it can feed backwards and damage the book. So I think there is something to be said about being very careful to make sure you're not negating each other. You know, that you're not there's a word I'm looking for, but yeah, I always say negate. You try to be reflective, not contradict each other, right? So it's like, you know, so with Damien, I was really lucky at the time that Ben Abernathy was like, okay, he's on the island, nobody can touch him. Like Damien will, as long as he's on the island, he is not going to be appearing anywhere else in the core line Gotham Group books, right? Like that was the thing. And we kept that going for a little bit through Batman and Robin as well, where it was like, Damien is over here. Don't have him everywhere else, because that can cause challenges at times. But there's two sides to this. One, of course, he's going to appear in other books.
Yeah.
You know, of course he's going to. So it was like he would appear in Chip's Batman. You know, it's like, of course he's going to. So I just talked to Chip at the time. Talk shit. You know, make sure we're not doing anything crazy. Like if he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna have Damian shave his head in this issue," I'd be like, "Okay, wait." You know,
I
it's
gotta
like
tell my right. I gotta
he
tell
never
the
said
artist.
that. That never happened. He never said that. But
Yeah.
you know, that is something. And there have been times. Let me tell you, when you're in the middle of a summit, and suddenly somebody realizes something's happening to the character they're working on and smells his book, and it's like changing them drastically. I've been in those summits, and boy, that is a fascinating day. It really just comes down to a lot of communication, and it can be a struggle sometimes. You gotta not be precious. You gotta recognize, as much as you might love that little baby, you are babysitting. So
Right.
you gotta be able to let go of these things. You gotta be able to have that conversation and try to find ways. I think I've gained a little bit of a reputation as a fixer. I love puzzles, so it's like I always see these things, and just working with people and trying to find ways. You know, to just communicate and work with them. But it can definitely be tough at times. I think it's one of the hardest parts of the superhero job. It's there are days where I'm like, oh man, like I talk to James about this sometimes, because I'm like, you know, James is so much create our own books, and he's able to just do his thing. He doesn't worry about anything else outside his thing, you know, and so sometimes it can be frustrating when you're working in superhero books. So that's something I find an appeal of create your own, because it's like it's just that, and there's no comparisons. It's just you know. When Philip and I were doing Superman in Action, you know, we would just meet at conventions and talk and text each other and get on the phone every once in a while. And I'd be really honest of like, here's what's going on in my book. And he would go, here's what's going on in my book. And you just talk, you know, you just try to make sure you're not in it. You know, every once in a while you're going to bump into each other, but you just talk to each other. But it is the part I think sometimes can be, it all kind of comes together. I think some of the frustrating parts where like ultimately you do not own those characters. And that can be crazy at times. Yeah.
Ethan Harrison, could Josh talk about the differences between editor notes that he gets from publishers he's worked for? Is there a tone or a kind of characteristic between publishers for the notes you kind of get, or is that kind of
I
vary
talk
from
about
editor
this.
to
Yeah,
editor?
I've worked for everybody at this point. I mean, I think
It's true,
those
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of newer places I haven't worked for, you know, and I've never worked for Dynamite, but you know, I worked for AEW, Dark Horse, Boom, Marvel, DC,
Yeah.
Image, Bound. Like I'm sure I leave people out. I've worked for other smaller, even smaller publishers when I was coming up. Different notes. It's so weird because, again, this is a it depends question. I Once you get to a certain place with some editors and they know they can just call you
Right.
and be like, here's what I'm thinking, and you know, you can, and you once you have that level of trust, and you can say no, or this is why, or you know, find a way to say yes. I think it was Kieran Gillen. Kieran, I'm sorry if I'm saying this story out of turn, but Kieran, I don't think he'll care. Kieran told me this thing one time where he was like, you have to find a way to say yes. Like it was interesting, but I understood what he was saying, because it's like, if somebody gives you a note and they're very specific, you don't have to do that exact note. But what it really is about is, what is the note behind the note? A lot of times,
What
like
do they what do they want?
actually,
What's their
what
motivation?
is
Why
the
are they
actual thing
asking
that's
this?
going on here? You know, and then trying to find that out, and then can you say yes to the note behind the note? And it's like, oh, you know, sometimes it's like an editor can be like, I don't understand this scene. That's really what it comes down to. I don't understand it. Why is this here? And you got to find a way to answer it. And sometimes they're right. You just cut it, you know. But then sometimes you got to say, this is why. No, I mean, I think I've never had a company be drastically different. Maybe sometimes a format. Like there are times where it's like some companies want to get on the phone. Some people, it's not companies, it's people. Some
Yeah.
people want to get on the phone. Some want to send you a list. Some send you like, so with GI Joe, like with that, and I actually kind of prefer this because it's more specific. They'll take the script and they'll put little notes in the document of
I've
like,
seen that. Yeah, like little annotations where you can click on them.
yeah, but those are interesting because that means your outline is pretty tight. It's like very specific, like on this page, this one thing, or and I like when notes are more formed in the way of a question than anything else. But it depends. Some people come in and they go like, "Here's all this stuff." You know, I've had instances where the trust wasn't there yet, the relationship wasn't there yet, and it was like just a brick of text of notes. Like that's happened to me before. I don't think the publishers, as far as I know, I don't believe any publisher has a particular format for note giving that I'm aware of.
Mm.
I don't think there's a specific like, here's a questionnaire we fill out, we give it to you kind of thing. I think it's really depends on your relationship with that editor. different editors have different ways. So again, some might give you typed up notes. They might say, and that was always my request because I would use it as a checklist to make sure I got everything right.
Right.
Um, some just jump on the phone. I had a thing recently on an issue of Superman where they had 3 notes on it. They were all like little things, but it was stuff to do, right? Like make sure I do these notes. Sometimes it's a continuity thing. It might be like, hey, don't use this character for X, Y reason, whatever. That's fine. It's like, okay, cool. But they called me on the phone. They told me the 3 notes. We talked through them, but they also sent me a typed up version of the 3 notes, and that just allows me to make sure I can do it. It just depends. It really depends on the editor. Notes are funny because sometimes we'll get no notes, and no notes is a weird note on its own. I prefer to have a little bit of a conversation about it. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think most notes end up being a mix of things. It also depends on your relationship with that editor. So it's like there are some editors that I have. They know they can call me. There are some editors that will just write me a message on Slack, and they're just like, "Here are my notes," and that's easy because then I just look at it and I go, "Okay, cool," and I do them. It depends how much time I take on them and think things through, or call somebody and walk through something. I don't think any one publisher has a particular format they follow.
Piggybacking off of that, do different publishers have any script preferences in terms of formatting?
No, not that I know. I mean, everybody's so different. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting looking at like the Summer of Superman special that's coming out. You have 3 scripts in there, basically. You have Mark, Dan, and me. So Mark Waid, Dan Slott, and me. And all of us, our scripting styles were drastically different. Mark's is a little bit closer to mine at some point, but Dan works a bit more plot first. So it's like, and I don't, I'm a full script person. But that's something when I first started working at DC, both times, the time in 2012, 2011, 2012, it was weird because when I was doing Uncharted, right, that Uncharted comic, that was a full script. It was as detailed and as finished as it could get before it went to, Naughty Dog, before it went to the artist. I mean, that was really like noted. Where now it's like, sometimes dialogue notes, you're like, we'll just wait till the art comes in because I'll change the dialogue when the art comes in. I just do. So it's like there's no point in being nitpicky on the dialogue until the art is in. Like that's something. No, I don't think so. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So when I came in both times, there was definitely a push at times to do Marvel style. That there has been moments, I think, where there was a bit of a push to do Marvel style, and then that just didn't go anywhere. Not for everybody though, but that was the reason why, because it was just this thing of like, I always feel like if I do Marvel style, you're not really getting me. You're just not getting me, and so I wouldn't do it that way. That was sort of like my own thing on it. But yeah, nobody. I don't think there's any. I might be wrong. I might be totally wrong. There might be one that's like, what do you call it? There might be a situation where there's a smaller publisher. No offense to those publishers. There might be publishers out there that are like, no, we have a very specific public. Like this is this is the format you go with. I've never personally
encountered that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, real quick, as an aside, do you have to go?
No.
Okay, cool. I'm here for at least another 15 minutes, so I was just making sure with you that you're good.
Yeah. No, I'm good.
All right, I'm gonna dive into the ComicPop ones, the 60 questions.
Oh God, yeah, the 61 questions.
So, people listening, so it was really funny when Sal did this. We were like, okay, cool. There's like 40 questions with the Patreon. We can do that easy. And then after we did it, Sal was like, actually, there are 60 other questions
over on the different channel, over on the other channel.
And, so we're gonna start with that. I'm gonna do these in order from whatever it tells me. I think it says newest first. Yeah. Okay. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Hey, bud. I'm sorry. Listen, I will probably skip some questions if I've answered them.
Yeah, if they've been answered, or if they're something you can't talk on,
So we're bouncing around a little bit. Okay, so hey, bud, love Rogues. Was just curious, how involved are your scripts? Is it like Alan Moore level of direction in terms of angles and everything within panel, or do you use minimal direction, allow us to do their thing?
I like that.
When I first started off, I definitely called out the size of the panel, and I called out the direction, like what the angle was. I don't do that anymore. I will sometimes give kind of an answer of it, but I really much more talk about the intent of a panel and the characters in it, and just sort of like what is in their head a little bit in the panel. Yeah. Even then, I try to keep pretty minimal. It's also because it's time consuming to do that amount of stuff. I used to, unless it is something very important to the story, I don't call out the angles anymore. If I really feel like, I mean, here's the thing. So if it's like I'm establishing shot, I will ask specifically, like, keep this amount of distance so I can see these things. I do try to make sure that the scenes are grounded in a location. So I do sometimes will call out like this is the establishing panel. So use this for this. Like remind the reader of what the physical space these characters are in. I will sometimes describe like a close up of this or this. You know, you're looking at, and I like when characters look right at us sometimes in certain scenes. So I might describe that. But no, and then I don't get as hardcore about it. Like something like Dan Mora, there's no point because Dan is a genius. So let Dan do his thing. He gets it.
Although
Dan knows what's up.
Although hilariously, we have an example of Dan Mora and the fact that you had to give visual direction about how to compose a double page splash.
This was it because when we did the so this was an example of this. So yeah, when we did the all in special, there were two moments in that where I had to basically show this is what I mean, and it was when the page started to burn. So I had to literally on my iPad while talking to Daniel Sampier on his Zoom, I had to like literally show him no like this. And then when with Dan, I had to explain because a lot of people did not. It wasn't just Dan. There were people internally that did not understand that like it needs to be read both ways.
Yep.
And they were like, "We don't like this." I'm like, "Oh, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me." The funny thing was, I could not. I had this in my head. I'm like, I know there's an Ivan Reyes drawing of like a million Green Lanterns that is basically what I'm describing, where they're in a circle. Basically, you know, it's like one that no matter what angle you look at it, it's just a bunch of Green Lanterns coming at you in space. So I literally drew the layout for the last page where it was like Darkseid's big ass head is in the middle, and then the Legion characters are all around it. So no matter what happens, which way you look at it, it's just Darkseid in the middle with the Legion characters. So I drew that one. But that was because that was like a trickery thing, you know? So yeah, that does happen every once in a while, but boy, that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
When considering developing a pitch for Image or any other company with the means to pitch to, what are the most important things to bring into your pitch? Clarity. I'm gonna keep hitting this. It's like, what is the story you're trying to tell me? Like I hear this sometimes. People are they're looking at vibes, they're looking at the tone, and that's all great and dandy, or the messaging of it. That's all awesome. I'm glad that's there, but that is all icing. You know, like where's my cake at, man? Like what is the story? And I think that's the thing where it looks at these things, clarity, story. So it's like, and we will get into this with the nail biter pitch. What is your top line? How do you explain this as efficiently as possible? You know, I think that's it. It's and then who's the audience is even for, right? You know, it's like really think about those pieces of it. But I think if you can explain it, I mean, listen, your pitch should be no longer than one page. Just do your best. I promise you can do it. I promise you can do it. And in fact, you could probably really get down to a paragraph, but give yourself the page. Give yourself the page. Break down what is the actual log line, right? People hate this stuff, the elevator pitches, but it's what works. Just
Yeah.
what's your log line? What is the actual thing of this book? Why does this book matter? Why should they publish it? Like, I mean, it sounds so crazy, but it's like, and who's this book for? What are there's a term in Hollywood like comps, and people sometimes will hate comps. But I'm like, listen, the best thing for you to do is to find the most efficient way to pitch it. If you don't want to do comps, totally cool. Make sure you can pitch it in an efficient way. And then have it be, don't use a bunch of, $1,000 words. It's like, go cheap and easy, man. Just try to explain it. Don't try to be heady. Don't try to impress anybody. I think it's okay to impress them when it comes to just being able to, like, listen, the idea of I can read this and go, I know exactly what this is. Here's a trick. I'm not sure if you and I were talking about this before. The key to a good pitch is if you could pitch it to somebody and then they can repeat it to somebody else.
Right.
If they can repeat it, that means it's clear and it's clean. And that's what happens. There's a lot of times in a Hollywood setting, it's like a guy is walking down the hallway talking to their boss and they can go, this is what it is. And then they go, oh, I know what that is. Like, that's it. That to me is what you got to be able to do. Okay, so the next question is, for first-time writers, how much detail should you put in describing each panel? Also, when setting the scene, do you give a general layout of the locale before giving panel actions, like describing where all the major details need to be? This room has posters on 2 walls. I get what you're saying. It depends. So I like to do a thing where it's like I will kind of say what the page is about at the top of the page, because really you're not talking to your audience in that moment. You're talking to the artist. So
Right.
giving the artist as much information as possible. I try to give as much information as I can at the top, and then work my way through, like set the scene, like you're saying, right? It's like, and the one of the weirdest ones with this is when you introduce a new character, because you don't want to have a thing where you're like, and then this character shows up and it's a new character, and then you're just like, let me now write this entire Bible of this character in this panel description.
Yes. That's not going to work.
Do it at the beginning. Be like, I do a cast list at the top of my script. So I literally say, here are the people in this book. It's always a trick sometimes because I'm like, if a surprise character shows up, I'm like, do I put that on the first page? Do I put it? I don't know. And then so it depends, because sometimes you do want to. It's funny because your artist and your editor are your first readers, you know, and so you do kind of want them to have a good experience. But at the same time, they're not your audience. You're not trying to surprise them. You're not trying to trick them. You want them as much information as possible. So again, it depends. But I would say to you, if you're introducing characters, put that early. If you're setting scenes, put that, yes. And this will also help you when it comes to the colorist as well, right? Because every colorist will tell you, please put what time of day it is. So put as much information as you can at the top of the page or the top of the scene. So it's like I wrote a script this week where I was like, the next 4 pages are actually 2 interlude scenes in these 2 locations. So I basically spelt out the location first and little things like that. So it's like there's a scene coming up where Clark is in his bedroom, and I just spent a lot, and that's going to be the scene for a few pages. So I wrote up, you know, this is what's in that scene. Like, yeah, and that's a good example. There's posters on the wall. I describe those posters early. You want to make sure they have the much. Basically, the artist should be able to get an understanding of the environment first, not as they're learning it. You know, not as they're going through. You want to give them as much as you can. How done should a comic be before pitching? This is one I've seen debated online a lot, and it's interesting to see different takes on this. You do not have to have a finished issue. You don't. For me, if you're pitching Image, there's stages involved, and it does involve some of your experience, right? If you were a brand new baby and no one's ever heard of you, you might get more leverage if you have the first full issue, right? But 6 pages, a cover, plus your 1-page pitch is probably enough for the most part. I would say that's really a place to start. If then you go to a publisher and they say we need to see more, then you have that conversation. I would not go down the line and be like, because we're talking about pitching. So I would not go down the line and be like, here's my 3 issues are finished. It's like, it depends on the publisher. Because different publishers, this is something that's a little different. Some publishers want to have a hand and create their own stuff. They want to have a say. They want to give you the notes. Some are just like, we want this as figured out as it can be. But even then, you know, like this, and they might have it. Yeah, I would say try to, again, start small as best as you can. Don't commit a whole first issue. Don't commit 3 issues if you can. There are some publishers out there, I think they want a little bit more. But for the most part, you know, they know. Like, you can figure out pretty quickly if it's first you can figure out pretty quickly if it's a professional value. But can you hook them in 6 pages? And that's something that if you can hook a publisher in 6 pages, that's a sign to them that you are probably a serious contender, I guess is what I would put for that. So I would not go as deep. I've never done that before. You know, I've never done a full issue or anything like that. Actually, that's not totally true. I've gotten close to that, but it's like the publisher knew what it was early. So it's like, you know, it really kind of depends. What exactly drives pricing? And do you believe the current state of the market is hurting or harming the public's interest in single issues? Well, pricing, that is a complicated question in comics, because what I find really fascinating about comics is when a movie comes out, I think we talked about it before, when a movie comes out and it sells, they make 15 million. And then you have a movie that comes out that makes 500 million. And then you hear the movie that made 500 million was a bomb. But the movie that made the 50 million is a huge hit. Do you know why? Do you know why?
How much the movie cost?
How much it cost to make the budget?
Yeah.
We have a lot of conversations about these numbers on the internet. And like I said, you know, we could do a whole video about just numbers on the internet.
Yeah.
But the budget is something you never know. and some
Right.
books cost more than others. And
Mm.
so it's fascinating to me how sometimes books will cost more than others, and it's like that's why the price point is higher. But it's usually uniform. Like a publisher usually is like, this is it, this is our number, right? And then this fluctuates, but you don't know some of those reasons why. There are P&Ls, but people have been doing this since the dawn of comics. Like, is this because listen, we all love it. We all love it. We all love this industry. There is a conversation: is this gonna make money? Who is gonna buy this? Like that is a piece of it, and you do it for love. And you can let go of those ideas, but those ideas will haunt you no matter whether you like it or not. So what drives pricing? There's a lot of factors involved in that. I think the numbers where it's at right now, with a lot of the books, with what they've cost, it's weird because you and I have talked before. It's like I remember when a book cost $1, and then there were books that would cost $1.25. And it was always fascinating to me. And one of the math I learned then. So I'm not going to speak of now. I'm going to speak of then. I'm going to speak of our beautiful early '90s. Us latchkey kids that went through one of the crazier times of comics. It's why we're kind of like, I think that people who read '90s comics and I'm not talking about read them in retro. You were like born in 2000 reading '90s comics on Unlimited. I'm talking about you were actively going to your comic store on Wednesdays, having to wait a month for books, and not the only source of information was Wizard kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe Hero magazine. Like this is it for you.
Wow, and a Hero Illustrated pull. Well done.
Dude, listen.
I bought 2 issues of Hero, and I was like,
oh, dude, because I don't think Hero was actually monthly. I think it was quarterly. I might be wrong.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I like Sketch magazine, Draw magazine. I had them all. Like I was,
Nice.
but
My shop didn't have them all. They only I got Hero because Wizard wasn't available in another shop. It was like...
Well, so the thing to keep in mind with since we get into this kind of math of things, so let's say it was the late '80s, early '90s, whatever, and a book was $1.
Yeah.
And then you get this other book, and you're like, man, this book is $1.25. Why? And what's fascinating is, and this is my suspicion in this moment, because the math was always really easy. It was like the books they knew were going to sell were $1. The ones that they were a little iffy on were $1.25. So like B-list characters, C-list characters, the characters they weren't sure on that they knew were going to have a lower print run.
Yeah.
They were always like a quarter higher, and I suspect that's why they were just like, this is a bigger risk, but this book has fans who love it, so we're gonna charge those fans an extra quarter. Like, it sounds crazy, but that was a thing then, and I'm sure there's somebody here who maybe worked at a publisher or something like that at the time period. That's like, that's not what it was at all. But that was my guess. So it just depends on that. Do I think the current state of the market is hurting? I mean, right now it seems like everyone's making money, so a lot of books are selling really well. I think if you want to have a conversation about what's hurting the market, again, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
How do writers break into the comics world? How big does a resume have to be to get noticed? Do you have to draw your own comics to have a better shot?
We talked a little bit about this because Bendis drew his own books and it didn't. And they were like, you're hired, but not for that.
I mean, we've talked about this. I think it's just about doing the work and getting in there. And, I don't think it's tough. I mean, you can have a really big resume outside of Marvel and DC and never get hired, and it's like, and then you do your whole career having an amazing career and never work there. I mean, I think there's, it's tough, but I think breaking into comics is a very complicated thing that we've kind of already covered, I think, kind of extensively. Let me see what else here. Just wanted to show. I probably shouldn't answer this, but I'll give it a no comment. Just answer in general. Well, I don't know actually. I mean, just wanted to show my support for Dr. Superman. Picked up volume 1 a few weeks ago, about finishing my current Conan book before cracking. Awesome. I wonder which Conan it is. It was probably written by Jim Zub.
But
it's like, I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, he's been writing Conan for a while and doing a great job at it.
Yeah.
It's funny. My daughter is like really into Dungeons and Dragons right now. I tell you this, and like,
yes, and you saw that like all the like YA versions of D&D,
are written by Jim. Yeah,
are him. Yeah,
it's great. Jim's a good dude. Okay, so if you were asked to write a script for the new DC film TV, what would be your dream project under James Gunn? I totally know what it is, and I totally can't tell you what it is. Like, I don't think it'll ever happen. My take on that is complicated. I feel like Hollywood is very interesting. If Hollywood would ever call, I would pick up.
Sure.
However, I don't think I would ever chase it. So it's like with that particular thing, it's like I'm not gonna be hunting James down. Obviously, I've met him and spoken to him and stuff, but it's like I'm not gonna be hunting James down with like here's my spec script for this character I love. You know, it's like I just wouldn't do that. I don't. There's something about it that doesn't register with me. Um, but I definitely have a particular character in mind that I would love to do something with. But I think it'd be really fun to do. Okay, this is an interesting one because I've debated this question for years. And this probably should be the last one that we do.
Yeah.
Actually, there's two here that I'll do. There's
Okay.
two what I'll do right now. Okay, so simple question: when are comics considered a success? That is not a simple question. Numbers and sales, of course, but is there a fixed number to reach? I have asked this question many times. Um, and I remember one time I was talking to somebody about DC about this, and I was like, well, it's just sales, right? That's it, right? It's sales. No, it's not. Sales definitely play a big part of it, but it kind of goes to that budget question too, you know. When is something considered a success? Well, because here's the thing, like there are comics that might not sell a lot, but they might win awards.
Yeah. But does
Or
that
they drop.
matter?
This is when it gets weird. It doesn't matter. And then it gets like maybe that book didn't sell well, but it draws the attention of somebody outside of comics, right? Like, I mean, you know, when you look at some things that get adapted and turned into stuff, they may not be the biggest hit in the world, but they, you know, somebody catches somebody's eye. Is there a set number to reach? That depends on the budget and the expectations for that book and what went into it. And can you hit those expectations? I remember when I was on Flash, you know, we sold really well right out the gate, but it's one of the main reasons why, and maybe this is it at times.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I was on Flash for so long, not just that story, and I really wanted to. I had a story I wanted to tell, and I was like, I want to finish this story. This is important to me.
But not everybody gets to do that. So it's like how you were able to accomplish that is
My sales stayed steady because some books do this, some books do this, which sucks.
yeah.
This is the cliff is the worst one, and everybody hits a cliff at some point. But it's how far that cliff you fall is tough. This was Flash. It was just this, just chilling for
Just a
years.
long, healthy pace.
And that's why DC would always be like, leave him alone. Leave him alone. Like it clearly he has an audience they're buying. Leave it alone. I mean,
Does that hurt you? The same way, like in corporate world, where it's like they do a good job here, don't promote them. Like don't get them out. Like don't get in their way.
No. I mean, that can go back and forth. I do think there was a bit of like, leave me alone at times. You know, like there definitely I would get thrown a curveball every once in a while, but for the most part, it was like there was no plan to take me off the book. Especially once I got around to like Flash War, it was just like, oh, leave him alone. If he wants to do that, go. You know, it was like just it's working. It's clearly the audience is holding, and that's it though. Like I mean, you talk about these things with these comics. I think that is ultimately what ends up being the sign of success because there are a lot of smoke and mirrors in comics, right? And you can do all kinds of tricks to get sales up if you wanted to. You know, I remember hearing this thing one time. Somebody said they were like, I can make a book go from selling 10,000 to 100,000. There are tricks to pull to do that, right? But getting a book to sell from like 40 to 50, that was hard. And there were times, but the real trick is that can you keep it at that number? And the creators that you know who were successful at some point in time, they were able to keep their numbers. Like look at Scott. Like part of Scott's success is not only that people really liked Batman, but it was a consistent high seller for 5 years. That is it. And that's it. It's that consistency of sales versus, oh man, I sold a bunch right out the gate, and then you know, it's like, well, can you keep it at the number it needs to stay at consistently? And I think that's ultimately what ends up becoming the success. But again, listen, there are books that we know did not sell well that will then win an award, and it's like, well, that is a thing to put on the shelf. You can't not, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, you got to invest in that, but it's like
that.
Yeah, you can't ignore it, but like what do you do about that? What a complicated and frustrating situation you must be in as like a publisher to have a book that doesn't sell, that is just like, this is not selling, and it wins like every award.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, man, there's a lot of examples.
We can't use examples, but like,
yeah, there's so many examples of this where there were books that, like, I mean, I know there was a story for a while where somebody high up at DC was really frustrated like 20 years ago about this, where there was a book that could not sell, but everybody was saying it was the greatest book at one point, but it could not sell.
Yeah.
And their book that was outselling it like 4 times, everyone said it was awful. And you're just like, oh my God. This is why sometimes, you know, when people are like, well, people on the internet don't like it, you're just like, it becomes such a weird thing because you're just like, well, let's actually look at what's going on here. And I always think that all these pieces, so this is part of it, is like all these things we're talking about, whether it's sales, awards, reviews, buzz, all that is an important part of the ecosystem of comics. They all play roles in comics. I don't think it's fair to say none of them matter. That's why I'm like, well, won awards, what does that matter? It's like it's all part of this ecosystem. And so that's why it's like, I haven't used this as an example yet in these last 3 videos, but I always use it in real life, and I think we've talked about it. It's like that scene in Batman '89 where Batman figures out it wasn't one thing; it was a bunch of things spread out across.
Yeah,
right? The Joker's plan wasn't like he didn't put the poison in the deodorant; he put it in all these different things, and then that
combination makes it lethal. Yeah,
that's where success comes from, is this combination of things that then leads to it, right? And that's why I was having this conversation with a couple of creators recently, where I was like, we were talking about reviews a little bit. And I was like, what's really wild is the thing that really makes you not take reviews as personal. We've talked about it before. There's many reasons why, but it's because sometimes you can have a book have amazing reviews, and it does not sell. And what does that say? Like, what is that? What does that say? There was a book years ago. This is like 10 years ago, I think. I was talking to we were having this conversation about what matters. What matters? That's something that's always haunted me. It's not just it's just the what matters. Right. And I've had this conversation with like really high up people in comics, and I'm like, well, it's sales, right? And they're just like, no, it's complicated. But I remember there was a time where I was having this conversation with somebody, and then I went to Comic Book Roundup and I looked at what was the highest reviewed book on Comic Roundup. And I looked at it, and it had like this amazing score, right? And then I was like, I wonder if I could find out how much that book sold. Like, how much did that book sell? So I did some research, and I was able to find out, the right people, you ask the right questions. And I found out that it had sold less than 1,000 copies.
Now, for those of you at home, less than 1,000 copies, like your average book from the big 2 is what? Like, I would say
more than that.
Significantly more than that. I don't want to get into
more than that.
But it ain't 1,000.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about like a significant number in comparison, but under 1,000, that blew my mind. It blew my mind. I was like, oh, okay. So one of the things that I've always noticed about when it comes to some of that stuff is the amount of buzz is almost more important. You know what I mean? If people are talking about it, is almost more important. But again, it just changes up and stuff like that. And so when you're talking about what is success, I don't know. For me, at the end of the day, it kind of becomes what you personally feel is successful for you. The publishers have their own list, their own things, and sometimes that can change. And don't get me wrong, a lot of times that does come around to sales, but success looks different to different people.
Yeah.
There are creators. I remember there was a time when I was hustling and I was doing like a little bit of DC work, doing my image stuff, doing what I could. And I would like go to a convention. This happened a couple times where I go to a convention, and I would be like, I would like to get a table for this convention. And I'm talking about, I got a table full of books. I'm hustling, so I register for it. I'm working really hard, and I'm publishing multiple books. I've got well-reviewed books that are selling well. I'm doing the thing, right? And they'd be like, great, here's your table. And it would be like in the middle of the worst part of the convention, far away. I remember there was this one time where I was at like one of the worst places you can be placed for a convention, and Rucko was nearby me, and I remember just being like, how dare you do this to Greg Rucka? And he also felt that way. It was like, how do you do this to Greg Rucka? Like, this is one of the best comic artists of all time, and you put him
in the nosebleeds.
Like, what the fuck? But at that same convention, there was another creator who had an end cap and one of the spotlights, and was just like very much treated at an elevated way. Got the table for free, and had done like one comic, but the people at that convention
valued
that was a successful creator to them. They felt like that person had done something for whatever reason that they qualified as successful, and more successful than what I had been doing at the time. And you will see that sometimes in comics. Like, it's so crazy. Like, that's why you can't really compare too much. You can't do the comparison game. You got to be able to just, what does success mean to you? And right now, success to me, being really candid and honest with you, is like, my kids are taken care of.
Right.
That sounds silly, but it's like, my kids are taken care of. They are happy. They have what they need. They have a future. They are taken care of. That to me is success. So it's like, that is where, to get a little personal, it's like, that's kind of where those things land. Okay, so last question for today. I feel like Silent are gonna be doing this every week for months. This is an easy one though. This is an easy one. How much creative liberty are you given at Marvel and or DC? So at DC, when I first started out, it was I felt like I could be very creative, but there definitely were parameters. And whenever I start working on a book, it is one of the things I ask. I'm very honest. I'm like, what can I not do? Where are those parameters at? What is off limits? What is off the table? What is on the table?
Yeah.
What are things you're thinking about already? Like, I do ask those questions when I come onto a character or come onto a book. I just ask as much as I can. Again, it's about communication. And then if, it does depend on relationships about that a level of creative freedom. And, just what your pitch is. And it's funny because, I mean, could you imagine, like, when Jason Aaron earned the ability to have the creative freedom to be like, so here's what's going to happen. Thor's going to use the hammer, and then Jane's going to pick it up. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's creative freedom, but not everyone gets that. Like, you might not get that on day one. You never know. But look at look at Ed Brubaker, right? So Ed Brubaker had done Gotham Central. He had done Authority, and Brubaker was already a name. He comes over to Marvel, and the first thing he does is the impossible. Is I'm bringing Bucky back.
Right. That's nuts. That's such a audacious thing to out of the gate suggest.
Yeah. And they gave him I think the story goes that they gave him like a list of questions. Can you answer these questions? And he answered the questions like he satisfied it.
Yeah.
He was like, I have thought about this. And that's what's funny about some of this stuff is, did you think about it? Like, it being thoughtful. Did you think about it? And he was able to present that. So then when with creative freedom, it depends, like there are parameters involved. They might be things, and also, there's things that limit you, because it's like, you might be like, I want to do this. And they're like, we just did that. Or we've done a lot of that. We don't want that. That is a thing. And you got to kind of factor in. That's not really, it's funny because, you come in these books and it's like, you want to be as creative as possible, but that also means you have to kind of look backward a little bit first to move forward. And so, I think it depends on you as a creator and like that trust they have in you, because when you first show up, they don't know you.
Yeah.
They know what you're capable of. They might know a little bit. They might know from, if you've done create your own books or you've worked on other publishers, they might know a little bit, but they don't ultimately know you. And so the amount of creative freedom they want to sort of throw your way, it depends on that relationship. And I've been really lucky at this point that I feel there's a lot of trust in DC and me, that I can have a lot of creative freedom. I can pitch some crazy things. Like, I mean, I've pitched some wild ideas. Some of the stuff I'm doing Superman is gonna really shock the shit out of people. At some point, people are gonna be like, "Oh, you're a crazy person." And I don't think. I mean, I've definitely gone to editors and been like, "All right, listen, you're gonna think I'm crazy, so just let me explain the whole thing first. Do not react to the initial. Let me explain the whole thing." And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But again, when it comes to Marvel and DC, I talked before, you were babysitting somebody else's child.
Yep.
So you're only gonna be able to do so much with that baby. Like, it's like you're only gonna do so much, and so that I do think you're able to get away with as much as you can when you can. But I hate how some of these questions come around to it. Depends, but
right.
I've been lucky with that. I definitely, when I started on Flash, it was like there were parameters, and I was lucky those parameters mine. But remember, there was also stuff in Flash that I wanted to do originally that I didn't end up not being able to do. And it's like, but once those parameters, this is the best kind of editing to me, is like you just are very clear on the parameters and the boundaries, and then let you go. And there's an understanding of where I'm at. And that was the thing with Flash. Like, there are things from my initial pitch that a lot of it didn't happen or didn't happen in order. But like, we had talked about this, where Max Mercury was a character I wanted to bring in early, and Bart too, I wanted to bring them in. And I remember Dan actually had some really good notes on this at the time, like Impulse particularly. He was like, people always want to bring these characters back, and they have no plan what to do with them afterward. He's like, they just bring them back, and then it's like, but what does that mean? What does it mean to the character? What does it mean to them? Does it have an impact, or is it just now they're just there? They're just window dressing or whatever. It's like, and I remember when Bart, it was great because it was like I was able to finally bring back Bart, but that was also a tag team with the fact that Bendis was going to be doing Young Justice. So it was like, okay, now I know where that character's going. I know what they're doing. So it's like, But again, so it's funny because it is like you're building these really big puzzles with all these
Yeah.
pieces, and so the creative freedom it does it's interesting. Like you have this creative freedom, but again, it's somebody else's kid, so you're kind of working within these parameters. But that's the best version of that, I think. Is again, and this is what I'll end on, is that like don't be afraid to ask questions. So when I go into a pitch, I might have my idea of what I want to do or things I thought about, but I then write up like here are my questions. Here's what I'm thinking. And sometimes I'll literally I've gone to editors and been like, what are you worried about? Just have much. It's okay to ask questions. Like, don't get as much information as you can. I feel like some of my career at DC has been because I'm not afraid to ask questions, and I'm not afraid to be a little bit nosy and be a little bit like, you know, opinionated. I guess
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to raise my hand in the room, sort of thing. It's like I love these characters, and so it's easy to kind of just talk about it with them. So yeah, that's what I'll end on that. Just it's good, just communication, because I think that can really help you with having that creative freedom. I also think with that, I think okay, I'm going to use a really really weird example for that. I think you and I have talked about before. You watch a movie, you watch this director, and they had a low budget, and that movie's amazing, and you can see the cheats, you can see the ways they got creative to make that movie,
Yeah.
and it elevates it in a way, like it makes them clever in how they tell you the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sequel comes around, and here's this crazy budget. They don't have to cheat anymore. They don't have to be creative anymore because the money's there to fill it in. And then you look at it and you're like, this isn't as cool as the other one.
Yeah.
Not as cool. I mean, we'll talk about Lord of the Rings. Like you watch the first one, like Fellowship, and it's like they didn't. You can see that dude directed horror movies that were low budget before he made that movie.
Oh
You
yeah.
see the cheats. You can see the ways that he was being creative to do it. And then later on, when it's like, and then here's the CG fest that he didn't have to be creative anymore because he had the money.
Yeah.
Like, and no offense, I really like all those movies, but it's like, I probably watch them at least once a year. So it's like, but you can see it. And I think
Yep.
you can see that as well when it comes to comics, that it's like, it's like, how do I put this? It's okay to be challenged a little bit. Once it's too easy, once you're being too easy on yourself or going the easy way, I think you're missing something. And I do think it's okay to be challenged every once in a while and ask the why and the what ifs. And I think it's okay to let people ask you questions about your story and ask you questions that might elevate it. And that might, the creative freedom sometimes, it shouldn't come with no one's allowed to ask you a question.
Right.
Because I think that can hurt you in the long run. Is one of the hardest things is to slow down and appreciate where I'm at in those moments, because it's like, and also take a compliment. Like it took me a really long time to take compliments. I don't feel comfortable with them a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a while. Like if somebody is a person telling me stuff, like I'm very appreciative of it. I never let any of it go to my head. I think that's actually one of the things that's funny with some of my peers. Every once in a while, we talk about this. We're like, don't buy into your own hype. Like, it can run into problems.
Well, you do have a quote.
What's my
Comics will
quote?
make you humble.
Oh, that wasn't my quote. I think that was Dennis Culver. Actually, Dennis Culver was the person that told me that. I think that might have been somebody else who said that to him. I don't know for sure, but comics will always find a way to make you humble. That is real. I mean, it's boy, life is long. So I think it's one of the harder parts sometimes, is to be able to kind of just have a self-awareness as you're working in the industry. It can bite you in the butt. So okay, but on that positive note,